Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Dr. Carroll, yes, a member of the Midnight Society science team and a good friend of mine, has once again decided he must call upon me as we have business to attend to involving werewolves. Well, that was very indulgent, yet seemingly just an appetizer. I guess I must attend to what Mr. Carroll is asking before I finish feeding. Without further ado, let's venture into the darkness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night. Yes, once again, it is time for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. Yes, the home and the stomping ground of the Midnight Society. And again, we have one of our science members who's decided to hang out with us and try and help figure out what is going on with missing people, strange animal sightings, and also, yes, unknown entities. So we, once again, are sitting around the late night fire to burn the timber with Dennis Carroll. How you doing, man?
Doing okay. How are you, my friend?
Definitely good to link up with you, and pretty good, just busy like yourself and trying to make sure to support the people that support me. So watched you with Jessica a little while ago, and then I was actually just in Jessica's show before I'm linking up with you. So, yeah, man. What about you?
Yeah, I've been very busy doing some other podcasts, of course, doing my own. So I always say very busy with that, but I enjoy it. Absolutely.
Yes. Excellent. What else have you been diving into lately for your own research on your own podcast? What have you been pumping out? Tell the audience what you've been up to.
Well, you know me, I'm always about cryptids, and it's a very fascinating subject, and I'm always looking for different cryptids all over the world. And the world that we know is actually filled with a lot of cryptids, and sometimes we just have to research them or search them out. And I've been looking at one very strange one in Romania called the pricklet. The pricklet is sort of like the Romanian version of the rougarou. It's a very interesting cryptid.
Excellent. Well, being part of the science team, I always do enjoy nerding out. Just a second here, you are going to have to tell us about this strange, well, like you said, a loup-garou type like creature. But before then, give yourself a plug. Tell the audience your podcast, what you specialize in, and like I said, what future projects you're going to be working on.
Okay, I have 3 podcasts that I do every week of my own. The one I do on Monday night is called The Road Less Traveled. It is where we do some sort of the offbeat stuff. And then on Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock p.m., all of them are at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I am doing Hunting the Shadows. And this week I've been doing an interesting topic on angels and demons. And Friday night, also at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, have Paranormal Point of View, where we do book reviews, articles, movies, and all that, etc., with a paranormal slant to it. And of course, I have a paranormal consulting service. If anyone has any kind of paranormal problems, or they just want to report something or whatever and all that, they can get in touch with me at DennisWCarroll.com, my website. And if you have any concerns you want to share with me, you can certainly do it there. I'm always available.
Excellent right there. I appreciate that. And you heard that first here to the audience. Yes, Dennis will help you out as much as he can. And of course, I will have his links up in the description of the video as always. And you're going to get to see a nice little cool piece of artwork with Dennis's information as well. That is all excellent stuff. And as stated before, if you like us, well, please hit that like button, because YouTube, well, they don't really like us unless you folks who listen to us or watch us like us. No pun intended, right? Tonight, Mr. Carroll, yes, has some really interesting knowledge that he's going to share with us. And then as we wrap up the episode near the end, well, we're going to read an encounter from North Carolina. Yes, Dennis's neck of the woods. And, well, there's a high probability he's heard of it, but who knows? Maybe he hasn't. So maybe we can blow his mind back when he blows ours with this great knowledge. I'm going to toss you the mic, and if you'd like to explain pretty much how this beast came about and where it's located and some of the lore and history, that'd be great.
Pricklet is sort of as I said earlier, a version of the Rougarou in Romania. It is a very strange combination in many ways of a vampire and a werewolf. And supposedly to become a Pricklet, you have to have been a very evil person. And when supposedly your spirit returns in this wolf-like form. But it can also haunt the living. It's sort of a revenant that returns to exact sometimes revenge or just simple hauntings, but also it feeds off of negative and very dark energy. So this thing is a very fascinating creature. To me, it has several of the attributes of the vampire as a returning revenant, but also as a werewolf, or in some similarities, very much like the Dogman. And, there have been a lot of Dogman reports down through the years that some have been sighted a lot of times around cemeteries and graveyards. And we've been asking a lot of questions about that. Is this something that has been conjured up by some type of black magic? Or is this some type of a guardian that has been placed there for certain reasons? Or a combination of both? But when it comes to this Romanian Pricklet, it is very interesting, and the fact is that it is very spiritual in nature, although it can attack and will haunt people and follow people home and actually invade their houses sometimes after them. So it is a very fascinating study and a very strange combination of vampire-like qualities for a werewolf.
Dang, that's some pretty creepy stuff right there. And when you look into Romania, it's got all that old school lore and such going back to, well, a very long time ago. And I know recently, well, I guess depending on how much you would like to emphasize recently, but Josh Gates was over there in around 2006, and he was talking to a village that, well, had pretty much abandoned itself, more or less. There was nobody left, but there was these people that still had a connection to the village that had told them about this. So I guess there were some still remnant people living in this village, but the majority had left. And They had supposedly been being, well, haunted and harassed by these strange looking jet black wolf like creatures with glowing eyes that were walking around and stuff. And apparently, some of the hunters went back to the cave or tracked them back there and found bones in there and scratch marks. Josh Gates went over there, obviously, to investigate it. He didn't get anything on camera and such, but he did find some strange piles of bones. I mean, wasn't really able to verify human or animal, but yeah, pretty interesting stuff right there, eh?
Yeah, I remember that episode well, and I think that was probably the Picolet that they were probably investigating. And here's the interesting thing about the Picolet. Very much like the Stringle. The Stringle, of course, is the vampire, the revenant that returns as a vampire. The Picolet is sort of like I said, a spiritual entity. And what I find so interesting about it is it actually haunts people. It follows them around, feeds off of this negative energy, this fear that they have. So instead of taking blood, it's using negative energy to sustain itself. That's sort of a vampire type quality that it has. The interesting thing about the difference in between the vampire and the werewolf is that the vampire is more parasitic. It is more like a parasite. It lives off there. The werewolf doesn't need you to live, but it does like to eat people once in a while. And so does supposedly the Picolet. It also is a thing feared in the Carpathian Mountains a lot, because this thing, when it's described, is not being simply like a dogman walking on two legs, but it also is described as running on four legs like a regular wolf, only it's larger and a more monstrous, evil-looking wolf-type creature. But it can also, when it wants to, walk on two legs. This is the attribute it shares supposedly with the werewolf and the dogman.
Wow, that's some pretty creepy stuff right there for sure. When you were diving into this whole being or werewolf / dogman entity, have you ever been able to speak to anybody that has potentially had encounters like you said? And that's so cool you remember that Josh Gates episode.
This thing is a well-known entity in their childhood that they're warned of as children, especially if they go out in the forest or they're around any types of woods or stuff like that, to be aware of what's going on, especially at night. This thing is a nocturnal thing. It is usually not seen in daytime, only at night. Most revenants and returning spirit type creatures are that way. They're very nocturnal. And she said this thing was very much like the Romanian version of the boogeyman, a sort of the Baba Yaga that you hear about in Russian folklore. But it's not a witch. It's not considered a witch. It is considered a supernatural creature that feeds mainly off of dark energy and the life essence of some people. It will drain your life away, supposedly, if it decides to take your life completely and not just feed off of you. So it can be a very dangerous entity to supposedly encounter. And the best way to keep it away from you is to either carry a blessed object of some sort, like a cross or a medallion, or have silver on you. And it has to be very pure silver. It can't be just like, silverware or something like that. It has to be actual 100% pure silver that you can carry with you. But also there are certain herbs that will keep these things away, like rosemary, sage, and stuff like that you can also carry in your pocket. So there are different ways. When I investigate a cryptid, I always like to look at, hey, how do you get rid of it, or how do you protect yourself against it? Because that is, especially as a monster hunter, I realize that is a need-to-know bit of information that you definitely want to always carry with you. The way to either suppress the activity of this cryptid or to fight against it should it attack you.
I've always had this pop into my head, wondering what wolfsbane was and if it had any actual historical aspects or where that ever came from. Or is that just some sort of entertainment twist, or is wolfsbane an actual real thing?
Well, according to them, this is not just a folk tale. This is a returning revenant of an evil person that has sort of come back in this form to haunt the living in that respect. So normal things would not fight against it. I mean, you couldn't shoot it with a gun or anything like that. So it is more of a spiritual type of a cryptid than anything else. So it's not that much flesh and blood kind of a thing. You understand? Yes, I have some wolfsbane here with me. As a matter of fact, it is a very important herb to have with you, especially when it comes to werewolves and stuff like that, or vampires as well, supposedly. Anything of a very evil nature, because wolfsbane is a naturally growing poison, so it's not a good idea to have it around pets or children or anything like that, because it is, I think, kin to the nightshade plant in some aspects. But it is considered in folklore to be one of the main things. That's why it's called wolfsbane. Bane, the word bane meaning something bad or poisonous. It is the main herb that will guard you against these types of spiritual entities, and of course werewolves and vampires as well.
Yeah, some pretty interesting stuff for sure. And like I said, I mean, there's just a ton of different misinformation out there about potentially, legend, and then what could be true, and then what Hollywood's put into play, so it's definitely important to try to get that proper knowledge out there. And when you said you spoke to that woman from Romania, that's pretty cool. That's creepy though, because I don't know if anyone's ever seen the forest over there. And same thing with like Germany and stuff. It looks almost like something from Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp. It's so creepy. And if something like this was really prowling around, I feel like it would be in Romania and all these creepy forests. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. There are many tales in the Romanian Carpathian Mountains that are fascinating, and they go deep into folklore. When it comes to studying stuff like this, I like to go to the cultural folklore itself. We have to kind of forget Hollywood, because Hollywood, although Hollywood sometimes gets a lot of its information from folklore, they tend to, shall we say, disperse it a little bit differently when it comes to entertainment. But I like to go to folklore, the old wives' tales, the things that people talked about, the things that have been whispered by in the dark around fireplaces at night, and things that they talk about. To me, that is more fascinating than the more modern type stuff. But a lot of this stuff is based in folklore. And as J.R.R. Tolkien once said, it is very important to remember the old wives' tales. So there's a lot of important information still inside of those tales.
Great stuff right there. And I was watching, what was it the other day that you would totally like? Oh, The Brothers Grimm, not the movie, but an actual interesting like depiction of some of their, I guess, fairy tales, but they weren't really fairy tales. Back then, it was pretty much like their rated R movies that we have now. That's what I mean, too, as well, because the depiction is, well, wait a second, these are for children, but they're really not. Hansel and Gretel, you got a witch in the woods trying to cook up children. Yeah, that's not good. And then, Little Red Riding Hood, you either have a werewolf or a man that is a predator. Either way, not good. But for some reason, it got twisted into these little kid like folklore and fairy tales. And another one too, the Three Little Pigs, right? That could be honestly depicted, as three little pigs, right? Or it could be depicted as three people in a house being terrorized by a giant wolf too. Again, that's supposed to be like what, for children, but that's pretty scary,
But when you look back on these stories, they're cautionary tales. They weren't really, I don't think, originally made for children, unless maybe to keep children in line a little bit, like the boogeyman I mentioned earlier. If you don't be good, the boogeyman will get you, sort of a thing. And I think Baba Yaga falls in that. We'll have to do a show on Baba Yaga one time, because this is very fascinating stuff. And I'm not talking just about John Wick here, okay? Anyway, the thing about it is that these were cautionary tales. They don't do this, don't make these bad decisions, and bad things won't happen to you. Look at the Little Red Riding Hood. It does not end well. The original one, she is actually eaten by the wolf, and her grandmother is too. No huntsman shows up and saves them and cuts the wolf open and all that. I think that was sort of a version of the Walt Disney kind of attributes of Little Red Riding Hood. And I think some of the Grimm brothers had a little bit to do with that as well. they tried to water it down a little bit so that children could be told these stories and not frighten them too much. You want to kind of keep your kids in line, but you don't want to scare them out of their wits.
That's just what I was going to say. Exactly. Because I remember being a child and my parents not wanting me to watch the creature features they watched, specifically my mom, but I still did, which is why I'm a fan of it now. But it scared the living crap out of me back then because she would be in her room watching something. And yeah, like you said, obviously you want your kids to stay in line, but I'm watching. What was she watching? I believe it was Nightmare on Elm Street, and I should not have been watching that. And someone was hanging from the roof, blood going everywhere. And for the next 2 years in my room, I swear, I kept seeing blood come from the ceiling in one spot, which it obviously wasn't because I would be like, what the heck? And no, it wasn't there. But yeah, like you said, the traumatization of that aspect. And it's pretty creepy because, yeah, you touched on it. Little Red Riding Hood gets consumed. And again, same thing with the Three Little Pigs, depending on what version you read. Well, obviously bad things happen to them too. To touch on what you said about Baba Yaga, yeah, I'm aware of her as well, and pretty creepy stuff too, for sure. Because one game I played, Tomb Raider, a few years back, actually had a Baba Yaga reference, and it was pretty gnarly how you could go in and actually do the mission, and how she was in her cabin with the creepy chicken legs. Also, I believe The Witcher has a run-in with Baba Yaga as well on Netflix. I don't know how well or how true to the actual lore of her they were, but I'm aware of her potential, existence for sure. It's pretty creepy stuff. And, well, you are located down near North Carolina, correct?
I'm in South Carolina, actually, not too far from North Carolina. I've been in North Carolina many times.
Okay, cool. Well, I have a case from North Carolina here in a second. I would definitely like to touch base with you and see what your thoughts are before we start to kind of wrap it up because, yeah, Mr. Carroll is a busy guy and we can't hold on to him forever, that's for sure. But, we'll get him back very soon. Yet, when it comes to what we've been speaking about, is this thing considered paranormal, you think? Or is it considered flesh and blood, you think? Where do you stand on that? I can't even say the name of it. So the pricklet, I believe.
I believe without a doubt, if there are monsters out there, and I do believe there are, definitely, whether they may be man-made or come from the darkness, whatever the situation, I think without a doubt they can be found if you know how to look for them in the correct way. I remember a very interesting case I had in North Carolina many years ago where a fellow said, would you like to see something very strange, And I said, sure, I'm always up for something like that. He said, well, let me show you something out here in the woods. So he took me out to a section of the woods and handed me a pair of binoculars. He said, look up in the top of this pine tree. So I trained the binoculars on. It was a very tall, pine trees can be kind of skinny but tall, very tall. And this one was way up there and almost in the very top of this tree with these huge claw marks, And he said this was probably caused by something that the mountain people call a dragon or mountain dragons. And when I'm looking at this, I think, God, those are big claw marks. That's not the claw marks of a bear or even a mountain lion or anything like that. These are huge. And then look how far up they are. They had to be at least almost probably 30 feet off the ground up in this tree. And he said that was caused by something like a dragon type thing. And I thought that was very interesting. And so that's what I say when it comes to monster hunting and stuff like that. You got to look for the clues on things, and you got to weigh them against what you know to be the natural things as opposed to the unnatural things that you may encounter. I've always had a rule that says you always must first prove what it isn't before you can prove what it is. And that's the way I like to look at these things, especially when it comes to things so unknown as some of these types of monsters. And he called this thing, of course, by another name, the snallygaster. And I thought that was very interesting. So I began to do a lot of research on the Schnatligaster, and it is very much in some ways like a cross between a dragon and maybe a thunderbird type thing. Very fascinating supposed creature. But if something could make claw marks that big in the top of a tree that high up, it was something you would definitely be watching out for. And I've always thought about it and remembered this very strange incident whenever I go out in the woods. So I always kind of keep an eye on the tops of trees too.
Wow. Great stuff again right there. And yeah, spot on. So creepy with pretty much all the stuff that's going on. And like you said, though, it is important to get out proper information and really try to look at it from all angles, which is pretty, yes, important. But a lot of people don't like to do that, you know, and everyone likes to just jump to conclusions on things without doing the research. But like you said, it's super important to dive into things and look at all the analytics and look at the historical aspects, etc., before, you know, really trying to present other aspects of it. And that's what you're really good at, of course. And I mean, you're always coming in here with excellent information, which is, well, of course, again, while you're part of our science team. Well, let's see if you've heard of this, because it's a pretty interesting case. And I was incorrect. I thought you were in North Carolina, but South Carolina, close enough. We have December 31st, 1953, 10:30 p.m., Clarkton, North Carolina. Local farmer Johnny Voss wakes up to the sound of his two large guard dogs violently fighting with something. Grabbing his shotgun and lantern, the man quickly opens the door and finds his dogs badly mauled and covered in blood, with one even being deceased, having had his head ripped clean off, with the skull being completely crushed in. While being interviewed by the media, Voss stated his dogs put up a hell of a fight, continuing to say there were large puddles of blood all over the porch and leading off into the forest. Voss also continued on to say that there was bloody saliva and slobber all over his deceased dog's body. Wrapping his beloved friend up in a blanket, the man returns back inside to watch his other dog until morning, when he can bury the deceased one. Dozing off at around 1:30 a.m., Voss is jolted awake to his one remaining dog screaming a howl of absolute nightmare before silence. Looking outside, Voss is unable to see his deceased dog or his remaining dog anywhere. 3 days later, while searching for his dog, the man found one of them with its head ripped off and its torso crunched in and all wet, seemingly from something chewing on whatever had done this. Yeah, what do you think about that, man?
I have studied for many years what I like to call Cryptid X. It is sort of I want to say in some ways, sort of almost like an invisible entity. It can't be seen, but you can see its effects. I have to wonder, and I'm not talking about Glimmerman or Predator or anything like that. This is something different. It's almost like some type of unknown yet strange arcane type force that can do this kind of damage, especially to animals and livestock and stuff like that. There is even a lot of cases in North Carolina, places like that, of these strange cattle mutilations and stuff that go on. I have to wonder sometimes if this Cryptid X might not be at the base of a lot of this stuff. Absolutely. To me, it is a fascinating study, but the clues I've seen, and like I said earlier, you have to weigh the clues against the evidence that you know or that you have. There are a lot of clues for this out there, although they're very hard to tag and they're very hard to, kind of categorize, but they're there, especially if you know what you're looking for. And sometimes they can be like those claw marks up in the top of the tree. They can be very strange in the way that they appear and very unnatural. And when you have this kind of this kind of an attack of something that can't be seen or something that can, attack animals and do this to them, you got to stand up and take notice of it, definitely, because it is some type of a strange and unknown force of some sort.
Yes, very well stated as always, for sure. And again, a ton of interesting information right there. And the encounter I read right there, do you think that was more paranormal based? Or, I mean, that's all the details we've been able to get from speaking to them, etc. I don't know if anything else is going to come in from that, but it's hard again to tell if something is fully physical. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of things that could have unalived his dogs.
Very much like the Wendigo, how it can operate as well. It is also known as a spiritual type of entity. And I think you have that type of a cryptid out there that can be more spiritual energy than physical energy.
Interesting. So, from all your years of doing paranormal research, here's a question I really definitely need potentially an answer to, because I don't know anything really about the paranormal except that it's creepy. Yeah, I've heard they paranormal entities can leave tracks and such. People have put down salt before, and others believe that yes, it looks like it potentially was standing there and put down physical weight. But again, I don't know anything about this. But can a paranormal entity be sitting there eating your livestock, or as like the case Linda Godfrey dove into, where that young girl said she saw that Dogman crunched down, or a werewolf creature, eating that animal on the side of the road, just literally ripping it apart and eating it. That's what I mean. Could that even be a ghost? I mean, obviously a ghost I've heard of can scratch people and things, but again, I've never heard of a ghost like ripping your animal apart in front of you and eating it. Is that something that a paranormal entity could do?
I think so, depending upon how it is transmorgifying itself into physical, from spiritual to physical type of an entity. Let me give you a quick example. I once followed something from an old farmhouse into the woods. I could never really get a good look at it. It was almost like a shadow to a certain extent. It left definite tracks across a field into these woods. I followed it a good ways in the woods, but lost it. So I went back to look at those tracks because I definitely stopped and looked at them. I saw them with my own eyes. I went back to that same spot. There was no way I could have missed it. They were gone completely, as if they had never been there. So the only thing I could come up with, if you actually run into some type of spiritual entity, it may be physical for a while, but then it goes back into its spiritual form in that way. And if it does that, then it will not leave any trace behind. That's what we've said many times about the demons that people talk about. And I have been involved in demonology for a very, very long, long time. They don't cast a shadow because they are not true physical beings, but they can take on a form to fool you into thinking that they are physical. And they can get physical with you in a spiritual way. I was once attacked by an unseen entity. I could feel its claws in my back, but I could not see it. And it's very hard to fight something that you can't see. That happened to me too. So I think there's certain cases from how I call it transmogrification, from one reality to another, where they leave the spiritual and go into the physical, and vice versa. That can happen, I think, without a doubt. And when they're in that reality of the physical world, they are physical, just as physical as you and I are. But when they're in the reality of the spiritual world, they are much more incomprehensible that way. They can be very hard to not only see, but deal with in that respect.
Dang, that is so creepy, and that would make sense. I just don't know enough about it. And that reminds me of a case we recently had submitted to us where someone claimed they saw a werewolf like entity that was coming through their wall, basically manifesting. Again, I don't know enough about this topic, which is great why you're here, but it makes me wonder too if, per se, these evil entities or something know that we fear monsters and such from Hollywood. Maybe they could also, what you think, take on a depiction of that? Would that be something that could also be occurring? I mean, they would obviously know what gives you and I nightmares. If they're able to, like you said, once they want to manifest themselves, turn themselves into something that would be considered nightmare fuel. I mean, is that something that you think they would go to the lengths about? I mean, look at per se like the black-eyed children and things like that. It seems like whatever is taking on the form of these knows like what would scare people. Children with black eyes, unless you're a complete weirdo. I mean, that's some pretty gnarly, creepy stuff, right?
It's very much like the pricklet I was talking about earlier. This is a spiritual creature. It is a supernatural being. It doesn't follow the known laws of the universe because it is supernatural. That's what that term means, above the natural, beyond that. It's not just paranormal. A lot of people get those two words mixed up a lot, paranormal and supernatural. They're two different words, and they mean two different things, by the way. Paranormal seems simply above the normal. Supernatural means way above the natural, and it goes into that. And when you look at the werewolf, and that's one of my most favorite cryptids. If I were going to be a cryptid, I'd be a werewolf. Okay, they are very supernatural, but yet they are the equivalent of something very dark and evil. That's how you become a werewolf. It is witchcraft to a certain extent, or demonological type energy that you manifest. This is not good in many respects because you're dealing with something outside the laws of nature. All bets are off.
Absolutely excellent, but again, super creepy stuff. Just the whole entire thought and, topic of it, and just the strangeness that's been going on since pretty much the beginning of human existence. I mean, got the Aztecs talking about this type of stuff. You got Egyptians making references at Anubis, and then you got the cynocephali with the Greeks and Romans, and just all of this. And it's totally mind-blowing, but absolutely amazing. And before we let you get back to what you're doing, is there anything else you'd like to touch base on tonight, Dr. Carroll?
Well, and I look back in history. We have a lot of examples of that. You have the jaguar men of the Aztecs. You have the leopard men in Africa. You have the berserkers of the Vikings and the Elfendar, who were wolves. The list goes on and on. We even talked about the so-called Germany parts of the army that were real werewolves, by the way, supposedly. We'll have to talk about that sometime. That they tapped into a dark energy. They were able to form themselves into werewolves or give themselves over to that demonic power to become that kind of a beast. The interesting thing about the werewolf to me is it is a psychological type entity that works not only on the body but also on the mind as well. It is an apex predator, and it will stop at nothing. And here's the interesting thing about the werewolf that's different, I think, than the Dogman, is the fact that once the werewolf gets your scent, once the werewolf gets on your trail, he will never usually stop until he unalives you. And he will do it in a very, very bad way. And the interesting thing also about the werewolf, he wants to eat you a little bit too.
Oh boy, that's so creepy. Yeah, that would be no good. I was watching some known human consumers with tigers and lions and just all kinds of creepy stuff. And just the thought of that, right? Meaning the last thing you're going to see is a big set of jaws and claws or eyes or anything in your face trying to consume you. That would be absolutely terrible. And I remember one bear survivor saying that the breath of this bear smelled so terrible too, and she just thought it was over because as it was opening its mouth to just crunch her skull, just the stench of it and everything. I mean, wow, that would be straight up real nightmare fuel. No need for Freddy Krueger or Friday the 13th. No, that's a real life bear just chomping on your head. That's absolutely terrifying.
That's what I once told. I used to do schools. I used to do presentations at schools and talk to kids about ghost stories and cryptids and stuff. And I used to tell them about monsters. The one thing about being a monster, you don't have to brush your teeth.
That's so funny. I know, right, man? That's so funny. Well, to the audience, yes. Unfortunately, we do need to let Mr. Carroll get back to the tasks he needs to attend to. But no worries, he is a bi-weekly host, and you will catch him again here in the Fox Den very soon. But if you want to see and listen to Dennis before then, well, you have three options. You can catch him over on his own thread, yes, which will be listed in the description of the video. Or you can catch him, yes, with Miss Jessica Jones and the Cryptid Huntress. Or you can just look at the playlist that I have here with Mr. Carroll and myself to get caught up as to what we've been up to. But yes, this will be the conclusion of the meeting for the evening with the Midnight Society. Dennis, thank you for hanging out with us again. You always bring in excellent information, and it's always really good to sit down with you. I appreciate your time and your friendship, man.
No problem at all. And I'll leave you with this little thought: be the kind of a fella that the boogeyman looks under the bed for.
Yes, my creatures, thank you. I do adore every single one of you. And if you do like my content, please share it, subscribe, feed the algorithm, and I will catch you when the sun goes down.